Hey golfers, Derek here again from ForeGolf Custom, and today I'm looking at the Titleist Vokey SM11 wedges. Right, so if you're new to the channel, you're very welcome. If you're coming back to see me and hear about what I have to say, you're also very welcome. Had a lot of questions sent in to me about doing this video. And the primary reason was because people are so confused about bounce and grind. So in this video, I'm going to break down not only how I'm fitting with this wedge and wedges in general, I'm also going to talk a little bit about the shafts and how that's working in terms of the fitting in the irons. But I'm going to actually lift the lid on bounce and grind and make it really easy for you guys to figure out what sort of bounce and what sort of grind you should be looking at in the kind of variety of the different wedges. I just want to say, Vokey do a brilliant job on their fitting system. Like they give us so many different options in terms of loft and bounce and grind and finish. It's phenomenal. But what they don't do a great job is explaining all these different bounce and grinds. And this is why it exists, is because out on tour, which I've had the great opportunity of working out on tour fitting wedges, is we've access to everything. And what Vokey have done is they brought it to the marketplace and said, look, here's what we do, here's the grinds that we use, here's the bounce, the heads, the finishes, and then they've kind of just let people at it. So I'm going to lift the lid today on how we work with bounce and grind. So keep watching. If you're trying to figure out what bounce and grind you should be looking at, I'm going to help sort of explain that towards the end of the video, so keep watching. It's very important that you get this. If you do, it's going to make your wedge play even better, and it's going to make you understand how you can control the clubs. Right, let's start with the wedge itself. It comes in 4 finishes actually. There's a tour chrome, there's a nickel, there's a jet black, and then there's a raw finish. So where am I using the 4 different color points? Well, realistically speaking, the finish on the wedge is more to do with the frame of the shot. When you put the wedge down on the ground, what do you want to see? The darker colors are usually there to create less glare or less sort of face look. And in fairness, some golfers don't like to have the face kind of shining back or looking back up. There is no real difference in terms of playability. But it's more about how it frames and how it looks, and do you want to have a dark finish. The darker the finish, the more it's going to white out during play. So the jet black is going to wear over time more than the chrome. So if you have this issue where you look down and you don't want to see wear on the wedge and you see kind of scuff marks or ball marks, then maybe stick with the chrome finish. If you go black, it's going to wear in time. Where do we use the raw finish? Now this is a bit of a contentious issue, so please don't go crazy, but I've found during my time with tour players that some of the guys prefer the feel of that raw finish. So basically what happens is they leave the last dip off the club head, so they don't dip it in the chrome or the different finishes. They just leave it sort of as a natural steel finish, which is the raw finish. Now, this has its advantages and disadvantages. Some players prefer that look. They say that it can feel a little softer, and then it obviously rusts. So if you don't like looking at rust in your bag, don't get the raw finish. But it has been said that it feels a little softer at impact. Okay, Vokey as a rule tends to be a wedge that I would work with if I want a lower ball flight. It does tend to come out flatter trajectory. It's to do with how they design the club itself and where they put the center of gravity. And that's the same throughout the clubs, irrespective of the loft setting. These are a flatter trajectory wedge. So if you hit the ball low and you tend to kind of close the club a little impact, it's probably not the best wedge for you. It's kind of why better players kind of gravitate towards this club, is because it controls the flight on the ball very well based on stronger strikes or good impact. You got to be careful about putting this wedge in play if you want something that feels very soft. Vokey has the kind of, I guess, history of feeling quite harsh or harder. It's a harder steel, right? So there are other wedges that will feel softer. So if it feels a big thing to you, this is probably not the head to be looking at. If you want good control of trajectory and decent control of spin and the best options to bounce and grind that are out there, this is the wedge head for you. I would kind of move it more towards that, I guess, better wedge player or lower handicapper or a golfer that can control the low point better, because that's when the bounce and the grind and the way that the club's heads are designed comes into its fullest. It's more about the quality of strike here. Vokey talk about this clean contact and better spin control. They also talk about the mid groove, so that's between groove 3 and groove 5. When I was working on the DP World Tour, I had the great opportunity to work with the Seve Ballesteros on wedges. He used to talk about the fourth groove. He would always try and set the club up so that impact was at the fourth groove. He was obsessed with the fourth groove. And what does that mean? Well, it means that setting the wedge up in terms of the actual grind and the sole of the club is always kind of configuratively built around the contact at groove 4. It's why Vokey talk about between 3 and 5, because they're trying to get that point of contact in that position on the wedge. And that's where the bounce and the grind come into effect. Before we get into that, I want to talk about shafts. The standard shaft in the Vokey is an S200. Okay. So this is a wedge shaft that Vokey have decided this is the shaft that works best in our wedges. It's quite a heavy shaft. It's quite a stiff feeling shaft. So it's kind of a more mid to high kick point. So there's a lot of sort of stability in the tip of the shaft. Again, focusing towards that better golfer, that stronger striker. That S200 works very well in there. It will work for a lot of golfers, but again, if you want something softer, you want something easier to control, you may want to look at something a little softer in the tip to get more flight or more feel from the wedge. I would advise you not to go up into X flexes in wedges if you can help it, because if you go too stiff in the shaft for a wedge, it can take the feel away from the club head, and it has an effect on spin and the way that the club head reacts through impact. If at all possibility, keep things softer rather than stiffer when it comes to wedges. If you need longer than standard, Vokey's not a good wedge for this. They're a very heavy head from the start. So if you need longer than standard, be careful. The swing weight's going to increase and the club head's going to get heavy. And because they don't have a lot of options in terms of shafts, your club is going to get very heavy. So longer than standard, it can be complicated to match your swing weight from your irons to the wedges, because Vokey inherently is a heavy club head. Right, lofts. Let's talk about this first. Vokey have loads. They start at 44, they go right up into 60s, and they're working in 2s as they go along. I would normally work from my pitching wedge. So the key to getting the right gapping in your set is to go to your pitching wedge and have the loft measured, and then work out in 4s or 5 degrees maximum the spacing from the pitching wedge onwards. You're always thinking about how far does the shot feel, not how far is it. And by that I mean you're trying to put the gaps correct between the clubs so that you can judge the distances for full, half and 3/4 shots to try and cover all of your yardages. Bounce and grind. Here we go. The bounce on the club. I feel it's almost less about the bounce and more about the grind when you're trying to figure out what sort of setup do you want for the sole of the club. The grind is how the club head is shaped from the front to the back and into the heel and toe. The bounce is the highest point to the back out of the front edge in degrees. If you are a steeper golfer, if you swing down on the shot, and if you tend to hit down on the club and kind of hit into turf, you're going to want to keep the bounce up and the grind a little bit more rounded. So this is where I would be looking at golfers in terms of their impact point and their launch and descent angle, and I'd be working about how do I bring the grind into the club head to allow for the strike. So I'm using a sort of an S grind or a D grind if I'm seeing a steeper shot into impact. So you keep F grind in the lower loft, so in the 42s, 44s, 48s. That's a full grind or full shaping on the sole. This will match in better with your pitching wedge and 9-iron. As you then move into the shorter clubs, so if you go into 52, 54, 56, 58, you're thinking about how do you want the front of the club to get to the ball. Spin is not by groove, spin is by friction. So you're trying to get the bounce or the bottom of the club to react with the soil or the ground as best as possible to allow the front edge to get to the ball consistently. If you're steeper, it's more of a rounded sole. If you're shallower, or if your golf course tends to be a lot tighter, where you're trying to get the front edge to the ground, then you're using grinds like the M grind, or you can even go into some of the T grinds. As you'll see with those grinds, the front edge or the front of the club drops down closer to the ground because there's less of the back. If you're trying to get the front edge to the ball, you use a grind that creates less bounce or lower bounce and gets the front edge flatter to the ground. We have a lot of links golf here, so we tend to use a lot more lower bounce and those T and those M grinds to allow the club to get to the ball and be more shallower at impact. You don't want to have a lot of grind or a lot of bounce if you're trying to get the front edge there. I don't use a lot of the K grinds here because it's too wide a sole. We don't have bunkers and fairways and lush grass to allow for that. So I generally go F in the longer or the higher lofts, so the 44, 48s. I go into S and D if I've got a steeper angle of attack, and I go into M and I go into T if I've got a shallower attack angle. That's pretty much it when it comes to bounce and grind. It's simple, but you want to think about how do you want the sole of the club and the front edge to deliver at impact to give you the best control or strike. It's all about contact. Angle the sole and the grind to suit the contact at impact. In terms of the club itself, like I love Vokey. I find the flight on it really strong and easy to control. As I said, better player, better strikes. I haven't seen it worked very well for low or higher handicappers because I think that the wedge is a little bit more performing than that. But if you're thinking about wedges for this coming season and you want something that feels flat, controlled and spin with the best bounce and grind options out there, it's a wedge you need to think about. Hope you enjoyed that video. Hope it explained a bit more about bounce. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments below. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Thanks for watching. See you at the next video.